It's really interesting because I was reading about the Weather Underground a little bit, and you're familiar with who they're?
A little bit.
Like 70s terrorists.
Yeah, they were like, what was their driving force?
Like anti-Vietnam War, I think.
Okay. So
I'm not going to pretend to know a whole lot about them.
Violent peacenicks.
Yeah.
Got it.
Violent peacenicks.
Makes perfect sense.
Blowing stuff up.
Yeah.
My understanding is a lot of what they did was shock and awe campaigns at like really early in the morning. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about it.
That sounds horrible.
But what's interesting is that it emerged out of the universities, and there's a lot of pro-communist sentiment among them.
Why out of the universities?
I don't know, but what I find fascinating about it is that the U.S. was engaging in these conflicts to stop communism, and communism was spreading, with these extremists trying to end the Vietnam War, which would allow communism to spread.
That's really interesting.
Yes.
So much I have to learn about now. I had never really thought about Weather Underground, so I'm going to need people to send me links about the Weather Underground, and like maybe your parents were involved or something. I
think one of the guys who was involved in it, like Obama had him at an event or something.
That does sound familiar.
Yeah, Bill. What's his name?
Bill Ayers.
Bill Ayers.
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know a lot about it. I'm not going to pretend to, but I do find it interesting that we're now seeing this weird rise of Marxism and communism when the Cold War is over. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of that Simpsons joke, which you probably don't know because it's like super early 90s. But the joke was that it flashes to the UN, and then Russia says something about, missiles or something. And they're like, he says something like USSR needs something or other. And they're like, wait a minute, Russia. And then he starts laughing, and then he hits a button, and then Russia turns back to the USSR like they're back. The Cold War is back or something. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen the joke. I'm probably butchering it, but it was something like that. And so a lot of people have been saying a lot of what we see in the U.S. that's destabilizing us were the seeds planted by enemies, during the Cold War that were supposed to take root in 20, 30, 40 years. They're here.
That's really interesting because that's something that Andrew Breitbart used to talk about in his book. He wrote Righteous Indignation. He talked about the ways that they were getting these ideas into colleges, which is why I was like, what? Did you say it came from colleges? I thought it was really interesting.
Well, it was university. I only read a little bit. I didn't do a ton of research, but I was pulling it up because I was reading articles that were anti-Trump, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, wasn't that person in the Weather Underground or something? And I looked it up, and I was like, oh, it wasn't?
Right, yeah, I remember that lady we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, that must be thinking of something else. I don't know the lady's name.
Frances Prittmer Fox or something, I think.
Well, no, I know her name, but who's the lady who was with Bill Ayers?
Bill Ayers' girlfriend.
Well, because she was with him at an event for Obama or something, and a lot of people took issue with it.
I don't
know. It's no surprise to me, though, that it's gotten as bad as it has in terms of nonsensical ideology. Right. So you think about what these people are spreading in these weird Marxist ideas, and they're not really ideas. I would kind of like. Are you familiar with how do you pronounce it? Prion diseases.
Yeah.
So do you know the basic function of prion disease?
Yeah. From what I can tell, it's basically. So I think wasn't mad cow a prion disease?
I think so.
I know Creutzfeldt-Jakob is, and these are diseases that you can get from eating other people.
Okay, so that I avoid sounding dumb. Can you explain to me how a prion disease works? Do you know?
Kind of. So I'm
putting you on the spot. But you're the fancy doctor. So
I'm not a fancy doctor. So I don't know exactly. My problem is that I'm starting at a deficit because I'm not entirely sure what prions are, but I do know that it works against the structure of the brain. So it's eating out holes in the brain.
My general understanding is that they're malformed proteins.
That sounds right.
And what happens is your body will normally produce, I'm going to super simplify it. Let's say it produces a protein that's shaped like, a certain shape.
Right.
The prion is shaped like a different shape.
Yeah, these are misfolded proteins. You're absolutely right.
And so your body starts producing proteins that are folded improperly and can't work. And then your body starts breaking down because all of a sudden you've got a bunch of let's say you need a bunch of proteins that are shaped like the letter R, and now you get a bunch of proteins shaped like the letter F, and your body's like, yo, these don't fit. What are you making? And they're like, I don't know. This is what we're
going to keep making it.
And then you die.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, the problem is that they're neurodegenerative. So it affects, obviously, first your brain, which means your whole body falls apart. It's actually really awful.
That's what it feels like what's happening with this intersectionality stuff. Yeah. So there was recently a bunch of, it was like a school curriculum release.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit the other day.
Every new school
I downloaded the whole thing.
Yep.
I don't know what it is, but it was just basic stuff. And one of the things you see was we did mention this yesterday, but just for the context, Where normal math problems are like, if a farmer has, 3,600 oranges and his warehouse can store 2,400, what percentage of oranges will spoil?
Right.
The question was, if there are 3,400 police stops and out of, 10,000 people, 3,000 are black, what percentage, so it's basically creating this weird intersectional Marxist idea Trojan horsed in through regular math problems.
Yeah.
Well, now you're seeing too that the 2 + 2 = 5 thing.
Yeah.
Like that to me feels like a prion disease.
Well, you want to talk about a misfolded protein. You try to inject the idea that 2 + 2 = 5 into building a rocket.
Boom.
You're going to have some problems because, and this is really interesting to me, the curriculum, because if you lay this out at the ground level and then you go from there, everything else is
Falls apart.
gone. Everything else falls apart. Absolutely. I think this is an accurate analogy.
Yeah. So now as a society, in every level of government, like in all over the place, you have these weird programs that produce nothing. Like, it's interesting when I heard you have all these companies promoting diversity, and they're not promoting function and practicality. So let you take a look at Gillette, for instance. What does Gillette do? Gillette razors.
They make razors,
You remove hair from your body.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they made a commercial that was about men being toxic.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does this have to do with selling razors? I used to always talk about this with my friends. I'm like, can you please just give me something where like the commercial is a guy going, "Hello, I make razors. They're pretty good. It has 3 blades. It doesn't hurt your face and it takes the hair off. Give it a shot. I think it's great. Thank you." Can't commercials be like that?
That's how commercials kind of used to be, right?
Yeah, they remember the commercial for Head On? Do you remember that?
Yeah, with the stick that you put on your forehead.
So weird.
It's really, really
but
weird.
But the commercial worked.
Yeah.
Because it just repeated itself 3 times and then stopped. Head On, applied directly to the forehead. Head On, applied, and that was it.
Yeah.
You know what the opposite of that commercial was?
What?
Have you seen the Quizno commercial with the weird animals screaming?
No.
It's considered like one of the best advertising campaigns ever because it's this really creepy thing of like animals screaming a really awful discordant song about sandwiches. And they're like weird animated things screaming. Yeah, and people just will never forget it.
I think I had a horrible nightmare about this once.
There you go.
But I would never forget it. Holy cow, I guess you're right.
The head-on thing is like a good ad. So anyway, back to the point with Gillette. These are companies that are prioritizing making an advertisement about men being toxic and not about a good product.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise, the company is like losing money.
Yeah, they're not doing so great last I checked.
To be fair, though, a lot of people play this up like this big go broke thing when actually the company was doing poorly already because of these subscription services.
Yeah.
You get cheaper razors,
like Harry's or Dollar
Yeah,
Shave
Dollar
Club
Shave Club, Harry's.
Yeah.
And Gillette was, maybe we'll try and call men bigots. Maybe what made them think that would work?
Well, their next commercial was kind of reversal.
Oh yeah, the next commercial they did was like this ripped blonde hair, blue eyed white guy with a white family.
Yep.
And he was in the
Celebrating
military
being with a family.
So it's like, dude, you got complaints about it, man, but that's like entirely in the other direction. Anyway, the point is, you're not. Why would anyone support a company whose focus is on improving diversity instead of like, I don't know, making socks? You know what I mean?
That's my first criteria when I'm looking for socks. It's to know what they think about me as a woman. That's the only thing I care about. And my delicate feminine feet.
I mean, I think this is part of the problem I mentioned earlier where media can only go in one direction.
Yeah.
But this is what I mean when I talk about the prion disease.
Yeah.
It is a cultural prion disease where these companies are, there's malformed proteins spreading throughout the company. You have a company of 100 people. And from the top, from the CEO all the way down to the lowly workers, they make socks. Yes. They make great socks.
The best socks.
They're the best socks. Everybody agrees. Okay. And then one day you introduce intersectionality to one of, I don't know, mid-level manager. Mm-hmm. And now he like forms differently. He no longer interacts properly with the other parts of the company. He starts seeing all of these things that are wrong because his worldview just malformed.
Yeah, he doesn't respond to the bosses properly. He doesn't
because they're racist. It's white supremacy.
All his employees are doing everything wrong because they're not as woke as he is. I could see that at both levels.
So here's what happens.
Yeah,
this person's upset, but protected by law. My boss is a bigot. You can't fire me. That's against EEOC regulation. Blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. So then they say we have to comply with some of these, training programs, which spreads the prion disease. Now you've got half the company that cares less about making those fancy socks that everybody loves and is more concerned about making sure everybody's holding hands and, you know, diversity and inclusion, all that. Now the company is making crappy socks. They're falling apart.
Right.
So like the Prion disease, your body can't function because half the proteins aren't working with the rest of your body. Here's the worst part, though. The Prions don't work with each other either. So these woke crazies in these companies they're canceling each other.
Yeah, they see it all the time.
So then the company just plummets. It just collapses. Scale that up to our country, and that's what's happening.
Yeah.
You've got you know, Bill de Blasio with painting Black Lives Matter, with no permit, with taxpayer dollars, with all the NYPD. That was malformed proteins that don't mesh, that make no sense, that is damaging. Supporting the riots, damaging. The riots, damaging. 9/11 Memorial, part of the cohesive structure, tradition, memory, memorial.
We no longer fit with that.
It's right. It's being ignored. It gets shut down. The fact is, not that it was going to be stopped. I should say, it's not like somebody decided we're going to shut this down. The problem is that there's magic money to manifest out of nowhere for Black Lives Matter. How do we ever get to a point where they had to consider not having the lights? How come it couldn't have been the city of New York guarantees that if you ever don't have the funds or the manpower, we will guarantee it by any means necessary?
Right.
We as a society, whether it actually ends up happening or not, prioritized a new fringe, unhinged ideology with no real goal that can only sow discord over remembering those who died and whose lives were sacrificed in trying to save others. It sounds to me like the 9/11 Memorial was built when we all came together to recognize, you know, what it means to be an American, how we stand together. And that was when we were very, very unified.
Yeah.
We built this memorial and we pledged to never forget. Now we have this expanding, you know, malformed protein spreading throughout our you know, culture, and it existed during this era too.
Oh yeah.
It was in the universities.
Yes.
And now these people have spread it outside of the universities.
Do you remember when we used to say, I don't know if you used to say this, but I certainly used to say this, and maybe just because of my kind of conservative background, we used to say, imagine what it's going to be like when these kids get out into the real world and they realize how hard the real world is, and no one's going to give them the time of day if they're just these soft butter soft little biscuits, and it turned out that they were the real world, and they're turning into the real world.
I called this.
You did.
I said it over and over again. I was like, so a lot of people, I'll be fair. There were periods where I would say something like, these people are going to try and get a job and they're going to get a cold, rude awakening.
Right. That's kind of what I was saying.
You know, outside, that's true. It is true. So separating the micro from the macro, you get some of these kids to graduate. They go work for a company and the company's like, what? And they go, oh. But give it a few more years and more people keep joining the ranks.
People get into the bosses' positions.
The universities are essentially cranking out malformed proteins into our society. And once our body is inundated with these, the proteins themselves do not produce. It is the equivalent of Gillette arguing about toxic masculinity instead of just giving me a face trimmer, a beard trimmer or something. Right. So imagine what happens when you have the CDC. 10% of its employees have demanded they sign onto a letter calling racism a public health crisis. Yeah, that's makes terrifying. Literally no sense. So what happens when our manpower for the CDC is overrun by this nonsensical ideology? Then you get a pandemic and they blame Trump for it.
Dude, this is something that has really troubled me. Ever since my whole career has been kind of at hospitals and nursing homes working with old and sick people. And I started to pay attention to culture and I started to think, what happens when this kind of nonsense starts to get into science? What happens when we stop looking for the truth and start looking for what fits our little malformed protein ideas?
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen then? Is that the end? Is that how the world ends? Seriously. Like, how are we supposed to move forward?
Do you know the legend of John Teeter?
No.
It was an old internet legend.
I've not heard
where this man claimed to be from the future. Huh. He made a bunch of predictions and it was a bunch of funny internet images of light bending and stuff, and it was nonsense. But a lot of people believed it was real. And the idea was that one of the ideas he had, and none of these predictions came true. I mean, maybe some people still believe this stuff. I thought it was a fun website. I never believed in it. But one of the ideas was that the U.S. would break apart. that the East Coast would be the East Coast would essentially be the remnants of the federal government, and it would be aligned with Europe. The Midwest, northern states would be like basically become part of Canada. The southern Midwest and South would be part of Mexico, and the West Coast would join China.
Really?
That was like one of the conspiracy theories from back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
That's fantastic.
It was fantastic.
That kind of,
it's horrifying.
That kind of feels like what's happening, because all the federal government is situated on the East Coast.
Right.
And sure, whatever, we have more in common with Europe. They kind of look down their noses at us. And then California seems to like them some China.
They love themselves some communism, man.
They sure do, yeah.
Not the rural areas, though.
Oh, no, yeah. So I would only take really serious issue with the southern part for Texas, for example, joining forces with Mexico. I don't really see that happening.
Right.
Texas is not that kind of state.
I'm just saying, like, that idea I thought was silly.
That is so interesting.
But the idea of the U.S. fracturing,
yep,
I see it as possible. I think people have an optimism bias, and they don't want to believe. It's everything's happening right now. John Podesta's The War Games they did. I don't think people realize the severity of what it means when the Boston Globe and the New York Times report that the establishment Republicans, before Trump, and the Democrats teamed up to play out scenarios and ultimately determined that it was preferable to have the West Coast secede from the Union than allow Trump to win the presidency. This was not some the MIT rolled some die and a computer program said this might happen. This was literally the politicians themselves making decisions for themselves.
Yeah, this wasn't like two weird people sitting at a podcast table, for example, on a Friday night talking about, the state of the country fracturing.
I mean,
these are our politicians.
They were literally playing like D&D, essentially.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. Actually, that would be a really fun thing to do. Like maybe we should probably try and set up some I'll do air quotes, war games.
We should. That'd be fun.
That'd be a real fun thing to do. Maybe like on the weekends.
Neat, yeah.
Yeah, we could probably do this.
Yeah. So based on what you know about these politicians and stuff they've done in the past, what do you think they do?
Oh man, I would play Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And the whole time I would be like, oh, and no one would have any idea what I was saying.
Yeah, it'd be great.
No, I think I'd get to be Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
And
I
would just
fight me for it.
You want to play Trump?
Yeah, I want to be Trump.
It would be fun to, but here, look, listen, we could play a war game scenario and I can be silly and be like, haha, now I'm going to launch a bunch of, attack helicopters. But these politicians were actual politicians.
You have to actually think about what the person you're acting as would be doing in the situation.
I think it would be interesting. And I've heard this a lot, growing up, that empires only last, 250 years or whatever.
Yeah, I have heard that as well, which is unsettling.
It seems like, I don't know, there's great risk ahead of us.
Maybe that should give you a kind of peace. Because maybe it's just what's going to happen. Maybe it's what's meant to be. And maybe we can salvage part of the country and go on.
Or maybe Trump wins in a landslide because people are scared of that idea.
Entirely possible as well.
I wonder about what's happening with the collapse of the economy, and I wonder if this will force universal health care. I could be wrong about this. My understanding about universal health care in Europe was because of World War II.
Yeah.
They had
I have heard that as well.
It may have been one or two, but they had no choice because everybody was like literally wounded and dying to just be like, we're going to try and take care of everybody and figure out how to fund it because we have to do this.
Well, they did that in Spain just now. They finished they were finished changing over their healthcare system because of coronavirus. And I remember thinking,
yep,
that's really interesting.
A crisis that will then force action. Mm-hmm. So, it's interesting. Bill de Blasio mentioning he wants to buy up all these buildings.
Yep, he just came right out and said it, huh?
Yeah, and the mass evictions. They're putting homeless people in luxury areas, driving out wealthy people.
Yep. I need a nice house.
But that's also stripping them of their income. Then Bernie Sanders says he wants to tax like 65% of all of the gains made from billionaires. We're not talking about money made. We're talking about let me break down for you what Bernie Sanders is saying. I got this here little Tim in a jar, right? Let's say this is worth $5.
Yeah.
And then because of the pandemic, a cork and a little glass tube and the things required become extremely rare. And now it's worth $100.
Yep.
Bernie's plan would require me to sell this and then give him $65.
Wow.
So the idea, so it's a tax on the wealth gains, not cash. Wow. So if I have no money and this becomes valuable, I have to sell it?
I guess so.
I guess so.
Yeah, because you can't afford to cover however much he wants from you.
I wouldn't be surprised if following all of this, we see a bunch of more social welfare policies enacted very heavily.
Yeah, and I see that coming from the right or the left. I don't really think it matters. I mean, if the country stays together.
It will.
Yeah.
But I guess we could just say don't have an optimism bias.
Yeah.
An optimism bias is basically when people think it can't happen to me.
Yeah.
Everything's always great. It's going to be fine. And then it's not.
So would you say that an optimism bias is what they had in 2016 when they were just sure that their candidate would win?
Hillary?
Yep.
Definitely.
Yep. So
they have it now too.
Yeah.
They picked Kamala, and I saw this progressive guy I know say, "Well, I still think Trump was going to lose," and I'm like, "Man,
you just keep right on thinking that, bro."
Yeah, and then you're going to lose.
Yep.
It's
I want them to lose. That's the point.
All the Hillary people who sat at home, we'll see if they learned their lesson. I kind of believe they didn't.
Yeah,
because I don't think they can.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
They keep advocating for censorship and then getting silenced.
They're like, wait.
No, like the Young Turks.
Yeah.
You know what, man? I say it a million times, but the progressives should have been behind Trump.
What makes you say that? That's a little crazy.
Because the Democratic Party, the establishment, if they get back in, the progressives are done for. Trump.
But that would require them to plan ahead a little bit, think
Yep.
down the road.
Well, so what happened now? For all of, basically what I see happening is the progressives didn't like Trump, but the establishment started handing out rocks.
Yeah.
And they gladly picked the rocks up and threw them at Trump as well. Mm-hmm. It's actually like, did you I covered this on my main channel, the White House siege thing.
Yeah.
They're planning a 50-day siege of the White House starting September 17th. And why? So that the Obama administration's, second in command can take the reins?
Yeah.
That's what they said. They were like, obviously they want revolution, nothing less. They say that. But they're going to protest Donald Trump so that Biden can win. And then they pushed the initial article, or it was like ad for Occupy Wall Street. Their complaints were during the Obama administration. Why would they want to empower the Obama administration?
Because in tandem with not being able to look into the future, they also can't look into the past.
Yeah.
And they can't assess the present to figure out what the heck is happening right now and why and what it might have caused it.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. If you want to catch the full show, tune in to this channel, subscribe, hit the like button, or check us out on iTunes and Spotify. And we will soon have this podcast up for free on all podcast platforms. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all in the next episode.